Hello, great. Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Susan. I'm from DBS Bank. I'm from the Human Resources team. I'm the head of Talent Acquisition Group in DBS Bank. Really pleased and thank you to Sang Hao and team for inviting us here to share with you about our HR innovation. Let me just start. Can you?
Terribly sorry.
It's okay. Okay, great. This is a busy slide, but let me just put things in perspective for you. I think a lot of you might have read about DBS Bank and how we have embarked on our digital transformation journey as a bank in reimagining banking. And that's a lot that you might have heard more on the customer front, what we have done for our customers, digital innovation, use of AI, and now today's perspective is slightly different. I'm glad to be sharing a little bit from inside the bank, the perspective of how we are also using digital technology, AI, within the middle offices and in particular in the human resources team that we have here. So this is what we have. I won't go through everyone in detail, but this is to set the perspective for you where we are. Now, what I'm sharing today is really about the story of Jim. Jim is actually our virtual recruiter, and he is likely to be the first in Southeast Asia. So the story today is a part of the HR innovation track that we have created for ourselves along the recruitment track in specific. But the larger piece of HR innovation that we have hinges on a couple of, I would say, philosophy or what we intend to do. So Jim would actually capture those in essence as I share the story along with you. So the first area that we look at in the area of digital innovation for HR in particular would be one first step when we first started in 2012. How do we actually use or leverage technology and automation to help us in our job as HR or as recruiters in the bank? So that's one. That's to make work simpler for us, automating, simplifying, improving efficiency, improving productivity. So that's one lens that we have, and we will have to bear that in mind. The second area that we wanted to look at was along the journey that we have, how do we create experiences, if I may call them customers, in our case it will be the candidate experience when they are interacting with DBS Bank. The third area will be along the line of, with the ability to use or harness technology, how can we better make use of the data that we are gathering and to actually translate this data into insights for ourselves to improve what we are doing or to improve the selection of candidates, in our case, in the area of recruitment. Now, let me just start here on Jim. So the objective we have here, really like what I've mentioned, how do we actually revolutionize what we call the talent pipeline that we have within our bank as we interact with candidates from all across the countries into our job as talent advisors? How do we do that beautifully, right? So let's start with when we first started, frankly, on the journey of developing Jim, our virtual recruiter. We started off with the proof of concept, a framework. Then we asked ourselves, what is it that we really are trying to achieve in this proof of concept? And some of you here might have similar experiences as me in your company. When you look at using technology, harnessing technology, and trying to integrate them into likely existing systems or platforms that you have within your organization, often a roadblock is how do we integrate the technology? And that becomes a roadblock because you need to start piping things together. Today we have API, which make things easier, but it may not be as easy as it seems. So this often becomes whether it is a resource or even a cost constraint for ourselves. So when we do the proof of concept for Jim, we told ourselves this. Number one, we want to make sure what we are trying to validate is really whether it fits into our job as recruiters for us to nicely execute on our job without putting the roadblock of technology integration at the front. So we wanted to make sure the journey was something we're trying to validate along the way. At the same time, we wanted to make sure that we do not compromise on things that are important. For example, in the context of the discussion of AI today, a lot is really about data protection, What do you deal with the data of your candidates who come in and apply for a job in DBS Bank? How do you deal with the data? Who is assessing the data? Who has access and rights of oversight on the data? So in our case, what we have done in the proof of concept framework is we brought along to that what we call a project squad. A squad was working on this project of GIM. We brought along our colleagues from legal and compliance. We brought along colleagues from our procurement team within the bank, and for them, they are very important partners when we were actually on our POC. Reason being, our legal and compliance colleagues are the ones who actually keep us in check, telling us how you should be dealing with people they are working with, for example, vendors in our case. When we actually harnessed the power of the AI, we didn't frankly build it on our own, but we were looking out for partners, startups in particular, who could actually work with us along this journey. So our procurement team then came on board. How do we actually look at the selection of many vendors? Today, if you are looking at AI for use in your firms, there are many of them out there, partners who are willing to partner us rather than developing it in-house from scratch. So that's one option that we took in our journey on GIM, right? Looking at vendor selection, and in-house, our information security team as well as our information technology team work very closely with us to actually provide a consultancy advisory role to the HR team. How should you be looking at data of your candidates, compartmentalizing the data, and of course, making sure that who have the access of data, right? As I share, I will actually bring you along on some of the practical things. Now, let's meet Jim. Jim, as we call him, he's actually our virtual recruiter and he's powered by AI. So on this next slide, you will see how he looks like. Now, this is Jim. Well, it's subjective whether you like how Jim looks like. Some people doesn't, some people like. But in any case, important thing is when we started to build Jim in DBS Bank, we wanted to ensure that Jim's brain could capture this key essence that we wanted to have. Number one, Jim needs to ensure that his brain could actually help us wire a certain set of algorithm that we wanted in the selection of candidates when we do recruitment or hiring within the bank. So this has to be wired in his brain, and you can hardwire them easily, right? And another important thing will be Jim then has to have that capability based on his wiring in his brain to screen candidates who come through our application portal and then look at the list of candidates, do a matching against the algorithm that we have built and do that selection for us. We call that the pre-screening in our context of recruitment, right? So Jim does that for us. Another level, other than pre-screening based on the algorithm, would be for Jim to look at, can you predict for us the success of the candidates on the job that we are hiring for? So that calls for another set of algorithm to be built within his brain to tell us, if you can pre-select based on the criteria that we are hiring for, what about predicting the success of the candidates that we might have shortlisted? So that becomes the insights that we were looking for that was important to us. The last piece of Jim in his delivery to our customers will be ensuring that the candidates' experience with us when they come through an application process is something pleasant. So that's important to us, and that's what Jim was hired for basically in the bank, right? Now, who were the people who have actually worked with us along this journey? So within the bank, we have obviously our own information technology team helping us build this AI put together. And Impress was actually the startup or the partner we selected finally to actually work alongside DBS Bank on this journey. And in the middle, you see here, Startup Exchange. That is actually our own in-house program started by the DBS innovation team. So to just give you context of how it works within DBS, it will not be practical for every unit within the bank when we are developing something along this line to start from scratch and figure out how we should be doing it, how we should be building a proof of concept, how we should be actually developing the technology. We actually have what we call an innovation team who is functioning like a center of excellence. And that is something over time you might want to consider building as a capability within your organization, because this Center of Excellence team, whom we call Startup Exchange in the bank, actually helps provide the kind of consultancy, advisory to different teams within the bank trying to figure out what do we do with new technology, what do we do with AI along the way. And that's important because they learn along the way, they share their experiences, and they give advices and support to the teams trying to do this. Why I say it's important is because from our standpoint as HR, we may not actually have the full visibility of what we should be looking out for, and these are our blind spots. In the context of how we did this particular test of GYM, along with the help of the internal resources that we have, including the Startup Exchange team, we look at one particular role, and we picked this role is the wealth planning manager role. And why we picked this role was because in the bank, and as you might have read it, the growth area of wealth planning was an area which we need to staff up considerably. In terms of the hiring volume, this is one role in DBS that we were hiring for quite significantly in the last 2 years. And when we started on the journey of GYM back in 2017, we were indeed hiring for a lot of wealth planning managers in terms of numbers in Singapore. And that's the reason why we thought when we build that POC, when we choose a test case, it's important for us to choose a realistic test case, something that will help us eventually in dealing with the volume. And for us in recruitment, we need that scalability to match the needs of our internal customers, who are the hiring managers in the wealth platforms. And it was that concept that drove us to actually work on this test case that we have. And the data points that we're looking out for would then help us give advice to our internal customers who are the hiring managers. And that was the whole thought process of it. And we adopted what we call a lean experimental approach in that whole process. And how we did that was this, right? We had what we call a group of stakeholders, key stakeholders within that squad who actually went out to interact. So in the case of our wealth planning managers hire, the hiring managers would typically be the business managers who were hiring all these wealth planning managers reporting into them. So that's one key group of stakeholders we identified for this project when we first started. Other than the internal HR recruiters, which means our team of people, we also had our HR business partners in the organizational operating model that we have within the bank. And these HR business partners actually are like a relationship manager of our business unit, in the case, the business managers. So they work closely with us. And of course, an important piece would be your customers, in this case, our candidates. Why I'm taking time to explain this to you is because I do not want to undermine the importance of change management in this whole process. When we're dealing with process change, or especially the use of technology, we were trying to manage it well so that we involve the stakeholders from the start of the experiment so they'll be onboarded with us along this journey. We were very concerned with the fact that if we were to develop it unilaterally as a team, say in our context from HR, would the users, who are the hiring managers, actually adopt that journey? So that was important consideration, and that might be something you want to consider in the longer term. How do you build in change management as you're embarking on journeys like this? So what we did along that whole experimental process was we went through 4 different experiments, 4 different stages, each time involving the stakeholders, and each of the experiment was actually an improved iteration of the previous prototype that we have built. So we are learning along the way with our key stakeholders, and that was how we managed that process back in 2017. And let me give you a feature of how this whole process comes together. Now, you will see this is how it works. And this is actually mapped along the whole recruitment process end to end. When we build Jim and his brain, it's important for us to consider how we wire up Jim's brain and have it integrated with other tools that we were already using. I'll share with you a little bit more. The other tools I'm talking about would be, for example, in the area of HR hiring, is really the psychometric assessment test that we put our candidates through. We wanted to ensure we built that into Jim without losing that, which we know was something that was actually useful and working right for us. We did not want that to go away. The second part of it was about having an automated interview chatbot within Gym itself. We wanted Gym to be able to have that interaction with our candidates as a virtual recruiter, able to engage our candidates, able to conduct interviews at his level of the initial screening. And we also wanted an answering engine within Gym so that Gym could take away the work of our talent advisors in answering what I would call possibly common or routine questions that were coming in from our candidates. That could be easily done by Gym as well. And the last stage we have was, how do we automate this whole process with Gym and have that evaluation engine within his brain so that we have a set of short-listed candidates. So that was the thought process of how we build. And coming back to what I shared about building in tools that we have existingly, which was stage 1 on the assessment tool. So within the bank, we use a couple of psychometric assessment tests for our candidates who apply for jobs, cutting across different roles, different businesses, and we have varied ones. So for example, in the context of Wealth Planning Manager, we were using what we call predictive index, and we wanted to build that within Gym, and we succeeded in doing that. Biometrics, I shall not steal the thunder away from our friends Biometrics who are here to do a presentation later. We also overlay, all this, taking into consideration. If we want to build in, for example, a test like Biometrics, which is more unbiased in the way we are looking at psychometric tests for our candidates, could we do that? And we wanted to ensure when building Gym, we could cater for plugging in the assessment from candidates who took that test and flowing through to our assessment process. So these are consideration points, because the last we wanted to was to build a Gym that was closed. And what I mean by closed is that later on, when you realize you wanted to make changes to that whole AI model, you may have difficulty integrating with other technologies that you want. So if I may call it, it's like an AI of biometrics within an AI in Gym. So that was actually the thought process we had as well. Now, this is what we spoke about, automated interview between Gym and our candidates. So we built it into that whole process where Gym can answer questions, can actually have an interview chat session, asking certain things out of that whole interaction process of the candidates. And we have also built an FAQ library of what are the common questions that Gym can answer when our candidates tend to ask them for help. And you can see on the top part of it, we also built in a feedback loop so that candidates can actually give us online feedback in terms of how the experience was like, any areas of improvement we should be looking at. So that's how it flows. And the last part of it is really the end state of the evaluation engine of Gym's brain, looking at how do you ensure that what is the final output of the shortlisted candidates actually fulfills our need for unbiased selection. So that depends on how you build the algorithm, looking at candidates without having concern over race, gender, and then making sure that there's a consistent way. The beauty about Gym is the consistency, because like it or not, when there's human interaction at the initial stage of pre-selection, there could be biasness that is actually built in when it comes to selection. Then when we look at the information of candidates, do we then actually have the ability to build in non-biased approach of reviewing, for example, previous work experiences or educational institutions where the candidates might have come from? And at the end of the day, this whole process, when being automated, can shortlist the candidates meeting these needs and shorten the period of time of our selection. And that was the end state that we were looking for. So what's the outcome of that at the end of the day? So before Gym actually started, that was sometime in 2017 when we were on the journey of experimentation, we were looking at each pre-screening of candidate took us on average about close to half an hour, about 32 minutes for our own human researcher or human talent advisor to be screening through at the first level. And that was the year where we're dealing with 3,500 candidates to fill the roles of 423 that we have in wealth planning managers. And after Gym was implemented, and by then we could see the results that it was yielding us, the 32 minutes of pre-screening was cut to 8 minutes, right? And we could deal with 5,000 candidates who came through our doors and finally hired about 600 in 2018. So that means 24 minutes of time saved per candidate that we were dealing with, 75%, And for 5,000 applicants that we were actually looking at in 2018, that actually saved us cumulatively about 2.7 months of time in terms of the recruiting efforts. And that was actually something significant for us within our team in HR. Now, that's for ourselves. What were the stakeholders saying? People who have experienced GYM. From the candidates, in terms of the scoring, the feedback mechanism that we built in, we were actually seeing an average of about 4.7 out of 5, which was pretty good. We also collected some verbatims along the way from the different users. So you could see from the candidates, they liked the experience, which they felt was interactive. And from the hiring manager's perspective, they actually like it that we built in within the algorithm some level of thought process in trying to sift through candidates by testing them on some situational questions that we built in. And from the recruiter standpoint, obviously it was the reduction in time spent, which means we are able to engage the selected or shortlisted candidates in a more, I would say, value-adding way, because time is no longer spread out over 5,000 people, but we can concentrate more on the shortlisted candidates. And for the candidate, again, it was something that we really, really needed their validation, because end of the day, they are a big customer of ours in the usage of this whole journey. And if they find that the process was actually efficient, that was a big plus for us. Now, if I could sum it up very quickly, what we have actually learned from our experience of building GYM in DBS HR was the efficiency was actually improved. The value add, not only to our candidates, but to our own team, was actually tremendous over that whole journey. But without losing the human interaction, I thought it might be actually useful to add on that this helps us at the stage of pre-screening. But we do still continue with a face-to-face interview with the shortlisted group of candidates that we have, because to us, we felt that that portion was still important, that human interaction, that last bit of human assessment in terms of behavioral assessment of candidates was sitting in front of us, whether we could assess them better for a cultural fit within the bank. So that's the stage that we are at. I would think if we get things right, you could even build this later on in how we progress GYM along our journey into building more work. For example, cultural fit assessment could one day be built in. But at this stage where we are on our journey, is to share with you that we do have a blended approach of GYM doing the pre-screening as a virtual recruiter. Our human recruiters do come in to have that interaction level with our candidates, to offer talent advisory services to them, to better assess them together with the last leg of behavioral interview assessments with the hiring managers. At the end of it, the data that we actually collect over time, I strongly believe would help us in refining how GYM's wiring would work in his brain. And that is actually the beauty of embracing AI, because it helps us improve in a very efficient manner over the process that we have today. Well, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. I guess that we probably have just time for one question. Okay. Oh, okay. So I saw you first. So, okay, the mic is over there.
Hi, I have just a question about the AI behind it. Could you tell a little bit of technical details? How do you actually screen the candidates? Is it just NLP, and how does it work?
Like I mentioned, we actually built in within that process different stages of it, starting from psychometric assessment tests that we build within the process. So we might go through certain tests or assessment tests. We get the candidates to actually complete them. That is built into the process, and that set of test results come into the AI behind how GYM would evaluate each candidate. That's one part of it. Another part will be looking at the candidate details that the candidate actually puts in when they apply for us through our hiring portal, and the algorithm that we build behind it, looking at, for example, scoring based on years of experiences, relevance of the experiences that they have, and that forms another piece of scoring algorithm. And when we combine all these pieces that we have, it actually goes into the final scoring of how we assess each candidate. And it's different for different roles that we are having. So you have to keep teaching GYM how to rethink, rewire according to the different roles that you are hiring for. And that's the building of the algorithm. And we do that together with our startup partner, and that's how we come together to build it. And they actually help us with building the algorithm based on our needs, our requirements, and that is actually how it's been done.
Okay, so it's like a supervised learning where you feed back information from the recruiter in order to improve the algorithm.
We obviously over time we have to keep teaching Jim how to think and rethink. The base set will be what you have first built, right? And of course that's taking from a lot of practical experiences we have over the years, and we build it in. But as we learn over time with the data that we collect through Jim, that helps us iterate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.